Hey, I'm Elia Einhorn. Thank you so much for joining us for the Talkhouse Music Podcast live at Samsung 837. This has been an awesome series where we have notable artists in conversation about their, or in today's case, other people's art. So far, we've had Hamilton's Javier Munoz in conversation with Hedwig and the Angry Inch's John Cameron Mitchell, Wyclef Jean in conversation with the Arcade Fire's Will Butler about the Fugees' seminal record, The Score, on its 20th birthday. And our most recent podcast, which is out today on the Talkhouse.com, is Nicholas Refn, whose new movie, The Neon Demon, is in theaters now, with Aaron Stewart on. Eric Slick, a.k.a. Teach, is drummer for rootsy indie rockers Dr. Dog and has played with Ween, Adrian Belew Power Trio, and Frank Zappa tribute act Project Object, as well as members of Wilco and Grizzly Bear, amongst many others. He recently wrote an amazing piece for the Talkhouse about his Danaticism, or his fanaticism for the band Steely Dan. Eric is also one-third of Philly noise punk band Lithuania, alongside today's other guest, Dominic Angelella, who's also played in Dragon King. The two go way back, and Steely Dan has been a big bond between them. They were kind enough to come by Samsung 837 to discuss the one, the only, the multifaceted and complicated Steely Dan. Guys, can you please introduce people who may not know the Dan to a little bit of the music and history?
Absolutely. Well, Steely Dan is our favorite band ever, maybe?
Yeah, it's definitely up there.
It's definitely up there. We bonded over Steely Dan in around 2005. We were both students at the Jazz School University of the Arts, and we got really into the Dan. The Dan formed, I guess, in around 1967 at Bard College. Is that correct, Dominic?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yes.
You know, honestly, I'm not too big on the Wikipedia edge of Steely Dan. A lot of it has been a personal journey for me and their music. So I'd like to leave this with you. I think you know
sure.
a little bit more than I do.
Well, Steely Dan formed around 1967 while they were at college.
Okay.
And their first drummer, a lot of people don't know this, was the raging actor Chevy Chase. He played drums for the very first Steely Dan gig, and I don't actually think they were called Steely Dan at first. They had some name like Wild Feathers or like
that would make sense.
Sequined Feathers. Or
have we crossed into 70 yet, or is this the late 60s?
No, we're still in the late 60s. They were still playing Bard parties, and then around 1969 there was a bust at Bard, and some of their friends went to jail. It's chronicled in the tune My Old School, but we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit.
Sure.
So I guess after that, they became a full-fledged group. They put up like a bunch of signs around school that were like, people who were into Sonny Rollins and Charlie Parker and Frank Zappa. And
it was like an anti-hippie thing.
It was an anti-hippie thing. So
Sure.
they put up like a sign like, hey, call this number if you're into any of these bands and if you can like rip on your instrument. Right?
True.
So the Rippers called them, Jesse and the Rippers. No, the Rippers called them, and by 1972, they released their first album, Can't Buy a Thrill.
And that's where we start.
So, Dom, tell me a little bit about your introduction to Steely Dan.
Okay, so I believe you and I both come from very musical families. My parents aren't musicians, but my dad in particular is a like hyper music fan. Like once I reached a certain age where he didn't have to like look after me constantly, he just started buying records again, and it was just sort of like this return to form where he rediscovered music. And as a result, I got into like tons of weird stuff from knowing him as my dad. Like Easter Sunday, I would get like a copy of Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, and Double Nickels on the Dime by the Minutemen. So I was really exposed to a lot of punk, psychedelic rock, that kind of thing. But one side of music I was not exposed to was the 70s smooth thing. And Steely Dan in particular struck me as something different than all of that other music that my dad and my mom really just sort of poo-pooed a little bit.
Yeah.
So in a way, Steely Dan was my punk rock.
You like how I just laughed when you said poo-poo?
Yeah, well, it's all about the language here. Yeah. It was so different than what I was used to. There's all this weird instrumentation. It's not jazz, but it's not pop music. It exists in this sort of weird middle ground. So I was really intrigued in it. And then when I went to jazz school, sophomore year, I joined the Steely Dan Ensemble. Which was a really interesting experience and allowed me to get a deeper knowledge and understanding and appreciation of this strange band. And I feel like it is very apt that we are here in New York City right now, the two of us discussing.
I know. Part of me feels like the two primary songwriters of Steely Dan are just going to waltz in at any moment.
Yeah, and like immediately take down everything we're saying. Because another thing about this band that I love so much is just the brutal sarcasm that emanates every single lyric in this band. It's unrelenting. It's unstoppable.
But what the heck are they singing about, these Steely Dans? You know? I guess I'll go into my history about
please.
Steely.
I'm sorry, Eric. Could you please tell me about your history with Steely Dan?
Of course. Well, Steely Dan was not really allowed in my house growing up, which is interesting because my parents are such musical people. But my dad was way more into like blues rock, so like Cream.
So we have like a shared history here.
We have a little bit of shared history here. Yeah, it seems like my dad was really into blues rock and progressive rock, and surely like Steely Dan would pop in there somewhere. And we actually had every Steely Dan record on vinyl, but it was sort of like my dad would make these passing comments like, "Those are your mother's records," and I'd be like, "What does that mean?" And then we got AOL.
For our younger listeners, can you explain what America Online?
That's America Online.
Okay.
You would get a CD in the mail,
yes.
And that would be the software that you'd install in your CD-ROM drive on your tower of a computer.
Okay.
That took up about half of the room.
Thank you.
The computer room. You used to have a computer room at your house.
I feel like people still might.
Yeah, but we had like a computer. That was like the computer room. So anyway, my mom's first AOL screen name, which is okay because it's dead, so don't worry about this. No one can email my mom. But it was just Katie Lied, which is the name of a Steely Dan record.
It was Katie Lied, Oh No, wasn't it?
It was Katie Lied, Oh No. Yes, exactly. I didn't want to go there. I don't know why my mom wrote Oh No after it, but it was a way of her... I think she also that might have been like her moniker, like her pseudonym. Like my mom went by Katie online just to like protect her identity. This was like early identity protection. So I remember being like, so like the Dan was just like in the ether in my house. Like it was like my mom's thing, and my dad would be like, "No, we're never going to put on Steely Dan records." And then, so in the article I recently wrote for the Talkhouse, I talk about the first Project Object tour that I was on, and I was geeking out on drum forums, and Bernard Purdie, the drummer for many Steely Dan songs, popped up, and it was like, oh, there's this beat that Bernard Purdie is this like signature beat called the Purdie Shuffle,
yes.
Which sort of is like this slinky like. I mean, I can play it. We can play it later.
Sure.
We can roll a song with the Purdie Shuffle. But then it led me to Babylon Sisters from the Steely Dan record Gaucho,
and also Home at Last too.
Yes, Home at Last. Yeah. They're basically the same beat, but I feel like the most refined version of it is Babylon Sisters.
That's interesting because I got into it via Home at Last.
Oh yeah, and that's a great segue because Home at Last was one of your first big Dan moments,
yes.
Right? Okay,
yes,
so we both bonded over Purdie Shuffle songs. I think that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It becomes more and more.
Do you want to give an example? We can play an example of the Purdie Shuffle. It's not like the Super Bowl Shuffle. It's very different than the Super Bowl Shuffle. Anyone know what the Super Bowl Shuffle is?
I don't know what the Super Bowl Shuffle is.
It has to do with the 1986 Super Bowl. It's
okay.
Just don't worry about it. So here is "Home at Last" by Steely Dan, and we'll be talking over it and with it. You can't fake that funk.
So much air drumming that I immediately go into without even thinking about it. Ooh. Okay. Okay, so check this out. So like this was a song that I did in the Steely Dan Ensemble in college.
Let Donald sing for a second.
Oh.
Let's Donald.
There's just so much going on.
There's so much going on. Listen to that headroom. You can turn it up and it just sounds better.
Yeah. So this song was a Steely Dan Ensemble song, but I already knew about it because in my earlier days I was a folk punk artist around 17, 18, and one of my favorite singer-songwriters at the time, John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats, covered a Steely Dan song, which we will get to later. but I decided that I was going to do a folk punk version of Home at Last.
Oh, wow.
Which is lost to the ages unless you overpaid for my tape on my first folk punk tour. But I don't think it was as successful as I wanted it to be. But the thing about this song that really grabs me are the lyrics, because they're so ominous, and to me the lyrics are really what separates Steely Dan from every other soft rock band in that sort of group.
Yeah, there's a heavy Bob Dylan influence there.
Sure,
Yeah,
of course.
Sort of like a early New York hipster.
Yeah, totally.
It's no surprise that the name Steely Dan comes from the William Burroughs book Naked Lunch.
Yes.
Moving on from Home at Last, we have my introduction, which is also a Purdy shuffle beat for the song Babylon Sisters. Now, I just wrote in depth about this song online and talked a little bit about the character development of this song. But let's listen to a snippet of Babylon Sisters, and you can hear the similarities between Home at Last and Babylon Sisters. I mean, basically the same tempo. So I was fully obsessed with this song. Completely immersed in this song.
Like the whole thing, or just the drum part, or
everything about this song.
What about it was so obsess-worthy to you?
The electric piano sound. So check out this story. So I was on tour with Adrian Belew in Georgia, and we were opening up for the renowned jam band Humphreys McGee. And they had this crappy looking keyboard backstage. And I was like, oh, I'm going to just futz around on it. And I hit the demo button, and it was Babylon Sisters.
Wow.
That electric piano sound was that keyboard.
Okay. Oh, there's a shuffle. All right, I hear it.
Yeah, it's a Purdy shuffle.
Cool.
It's like a triplet based. For all you musicians out there, that's a triplet. Ghost notes on the snare drum.
Now, I recently saw Steely Dan play up in Port Chester.
At the Capitol Theater.
At the Capitol Theater with my good friend Brendan Mulvihill. And this song, I believe, was on the set list somewhere around Hey 19. And so when you talked about the connection between this song and Hey 19, I was interested. Do you want to get a little into the lyrical connection between some of these songs?
Oh, you mean do like a live Dan Vinci Code?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Can you explain the Dan Vinci Code a little bit? Which is something we've been talking about for a while on tour and in off tour and in the moments in between.
Okay. So the Dan Vinci Code is sort of like this theory that much like Frank Zappa's theory of conceptual continuity, meaning that like every piece of music is tied together with characters and a narrative. That's sort of like what our Dan Vinci Code is. We think that all the Steely Dan songs are tied together in some way. There's recurring characters, there's themes, there's little musical motifs that are maybe replicated in songs, and you might not even be conscious of it. It's just happening, and maybe Fagen and Becker are really aware of it. So it's interesting to me. Gaucho, the record, the last Steely Dan record of the classic era. So the classic era is like 1972 to 1980, right?
Sure.
It's a pretty bleak record. It was made during a really hard period of time for the band. Lots of just crazy stuff going on. And Babylon Sisters is like this midlife crisis jam. And Hey 19 is also in the same vein. It's an older man with a younger woman, and they should not be together. They should not be in public together. It is shunned by society. So let's listen to a little bit of Hey 19, and then we'll talk about the monologue in Hey 19.
Which is a very important part of the live aspect of Steely Dan, but we will get there in a second.
Ooh.
Right? I mean, you just want to pretend to bend that string, baby. You do air synthesizer.
Way back when in
67, the year they were at Bard.
I was a dandy apricot.
I was a dandy apricot?
Is that what he said?
I don't think so.
Sweet things from Boston, so young and weird.
Ugh.
That snare drum sound is perfect.
So, I gotta think about this for a second. See, so the thing I'm trying to figure out is like these lyrics are so unrepentant, like does not paint him in a positive light at all. Is Fagan aware of this? Do you think he's portraying a character, or do you think this is him?
I think he's portraying a character.
You think so? I mean, I think so too, because this character exists in so many Steely Dan songs. This sort of old hipster past his prime, trying to navigate a world that is no longer
relationships, really. He's trying to navigate friendships and relationships.
Okay, so recently Eric and I realized that there was like a through line from this 2016 concert that I attended and a concert almost 10 years ago that you attended. And where was this concert?
It was in Ottawa.
Okay, what kind of concert was it in Ottawa?
Blues Fest.
Okay, so Steely Dan played the Ottawa Blues Fest along with Adrian Belew and who else?
And Zappa plays Zappa.
Plays Zappa.
Very curious. Very
Interesting.
Curious.
None of these I would really classify as blues artists.
No.
Who else was on the bill? Is there
Feist?
Oh, Feist. Yeah, is Feist a blues musician?
I don't think so. They should have called it Music Fest.
I think
that exists in Bethlehem, PA,
with a K. Now, in this performance of Hey 19, what exactly happened here that made you excited?
So during this part,
this specific, the vamp, if you will.
They gave Walter Becker a microphone.
Okay,
which is unusual.
And what happened when they gave Walter Becker this microphone?
He did a speech about being in Tijuana.
Are you allowed? Are you able to tell us what he said?
Yeah. It was like okay, Cuervo Gold.
Okay.
The fine Colombian.
Okay.
Makes tonight a wonderful thing. So the monologue led into those lyrics about Cuervo Gold, which is a. Can you tell me a little bit about Cuervo Gold?
Yeah, they're different things that people do to have fun.
Yeah, and Cuervo Gold is one of those things. But anyway, Walter Becker gets on the microphone. And he's like, "Yeah, you know," because that's his voice. He's like, "Well, when I was on vacation with my wife in Tijuana, you know, we were dancing all night and then we were just having a good time. And, you know, before I knew it, I was having a drink of Cuervo Gold." So it went like right into that.
Wow. Okay, can you run that instrumental part back again?
Oh, sure.
Really quick? Yeah, sure. I'm trying to set the scene up for anyone who might be listening.
Yeah.
So, 8 years after that fact, I'm at the Capitol Theater. That's right. My memories are a little hazy. I was partaking a little Cuervo Gold myself. I'm sitting there watching them, and they give Walter Becker a mic, and he starts on his own rant about Port Chester and gentrification.
Oh.
And it gets really intense and really, really, really personal because it's around where he grew up. And then before you knew it, he started rhyming. And it almost became this sort of weird rap that was somewhere in between the beat poets and like early 80s hip hop. And I don't really know how he got to the Cuervo Gold part, but suddenly it happened and it seemed to make sense. And so when you told me that this happened, I was like, there's got to be a reason. I mean, maybe if the reason is only like, all right, we'll have Walter talk a little bit here.
For the fans.
I guess, but maybe there's something else there. I don't know.
Why does it sound so good?
I don't know. Okay, we should talk about that. Why does it sound so good? Why is it that you and I are? Well, I think that you're really a perfectionist with music, and I really appreciate that because I'm not so much that.
That's our dynamic.
Yeah.
Dom's like, "Oh, let's throw this mic on the ground. That sounds good."
Yeah, and it usually does. But I think this band is a great middle ground because they're so annoyingly perfect.
Yes.
Like there's that, we were just talking about that, the classic albums where they had like 6 dudes come in and play guitar on, what song was that?
Was it Peg?
It was on Peg, yeah. And every guitar solo is incredible. It's just like something that I would be honored to play.
And yet they would make fun of every single take.
That was a wrong note.
Oh, I hear that wrong note.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't sound very good at all. It's almost like Eddie Van Halen playing on the track.
Do they say that?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds like some sort of heavy metal bebop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I mean, they're so
perfectionist, and I even in Babylon Sisters, that song was mixed 274 times before they landed on the final mix.
And how long do you think each mix took?
I can only imagine them deliberating over it in the studio with, some sort of speakers that were constructed out of the finest, the finest wood of the time with the finest speaker cone. Just them sitting there like smoking cigarettes and being like, it's not there.
Yeah.
And hearing frequencies that other people don't hear. And actually, I find a lot of similarities with that in my work with Dr. Dog, because Scott and Toby, the songwriters in Dr. Dog, they will also sit in front of the speakers for hours and hours and hear frequencies that I just don't hear.
Yeah, that's so crazy. I mean, it's so wild that some ears are attuned to that, and
Like, you hear that,
You're
you
like-
hear that, and I'm like, where is that? Is that your tinnitus? What is that?
it's like whenever I feel like this way when I deal with drummers, when you guys are like, oh, there's like this ping on the snare that I'm just like, it sounds like a snare drum.
Oh, you mean like the Metallica Saint Anger snare
Yeah,
drum?
like it sounds like Saint Anger, and
Like,
then,
dong, dong.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. But,
Sure.
But
I thi-
everything on these tracks are so perfect.
I think that in today's musical landscape, there's sort of a lack of attention to the production qualities, with the exception of a very few records. The couple records that have come out in the past year that I've been really blown away by, like Chris Cohen's record or
Yeah.
Andy Schauf's record, where it's like you sense that there's a real attention to detail. But I think on the whole, a lot of people are making music in their computer. A lot of people are making it on the cheap. So the sound quality of something is...
I got Neil Young in here. Or
Oh,
something.
yeah. Really, you should buy my Pono device. I like how I'm giving everybody the same voice.
Yeah,
too.
it's great.
I'm giving every old like curmudgeon the same voice. My Pono.
Do you think that the perfection in terms of production and everything like that comes from a reaction to the music that was made in the 60s?
It's possible. I mean, if all that stuff is mono and pretty ragged sounding, with the exception of like the later era Beatles records.
I haven't heard any of those.
the band The Beatles.
Oh,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it was a
Didn't
response
do
to
a
that, or
good
maybe it was just a response to maybe they were just such perfectionists, and because they didn't, Steely Dan did not go on tour. They went on like maybe one tour when they first started, and then they evolved into a studio-only band, and they worked with the producer Gary Katz, who seemingly has no other credits outside of Steely Dan.
Do you think that's a pseudonym for like just them? Do you think Gary Katz is like a deli that they went to in New York, and now that's?
We went down to Gary Katz.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, he's probably a real guy, and he's gonna come in.
Yeah, Gary Katz like, excuse me. These Grammys don't clean themselves.
Did he produce every Steely Dan record, or was it just a couple?
Every single one has Gary Katz's signature on them, except with the exception of the Grammy-winning
It's time to talk about
Two
this.
Against Nature, which was released in the year 2000, which famously beat out Kid A by Radiohead for Album of the Year.
Now-
Steely Dan rules a lot more than people want to let on, because Steely Dan versus Radiohead. I'm going to take the Dan. I don't want to be depressed. I want to listen to some breezy boat music.
Yeah, but you were like, we were driving around listening to that new Radiohead song, and you were just like making fun of the lines and stuff like that.
Oh,
so
yeah, I know. I'm just a hater.
It's okay. That's what I love about you. But ironically, Two Against Nature was probably the first one that I really listened to, because that was the one that my parents had. Because it was the year 2000, everyone still bought CDs, so they were like, oh, it won a Grammy, like let's cop. And I remember hearing that song Cousin Dupree and just thinking like, what is wrong with these people? Like this song is just about like being in love with your cousin, and the fact that they like were just like, okay, we're gonna just make a song about this. Sounds good.
That's what Steely Dan does. They're controversial. They're combative.
Yeah.
Steely Dan's combative. They're punk rock. Let me tell you, Steely Dan's punk rock.
I mean, I think so. But
Producing the records, just the two of them with Gary
With
Katz.
Gary Katz,
just
whoever
doing
that
it all,
is.
doing it all on their own dime,
yeah, all on their own dime.
on their own double nickels on the dime.
So that's we should talk about that.
We can talk about that in a second. We're getting a little tangential here, because I think we need to complete the Dan Vinci Code a little bit for Hey 19 and Hey 19 and Babylon Sisters.
Please, because it continues after that.
So I guess we just made the connection that the character in Hey 19 and Babylon Sisters is probably the same person, because Babylon Sisters talks about a man who is way past his prime,
Yes.
hanging out with younger women, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And then you've got Hey 19, which is like the nighttime scene. They're at the bar. No, we can't talk, we can't dance. Like, I'm realizing that you're out of my league. I'm an older man. This is not going to work. It's probably Chuck Steiner, who I bring up in the article. He's a character that I've created that I'm using as a pseudonym for, much like my mom using Katie as a pseudonym for her AOL screen name. This is sort of like a name.
Do you feel like in a way we are all Chuck Steiner?
Yeah, in a way, no, definitely
So
not.
so in terms of the story, we've got. I don't want to get too deep here for like the Dan newbies here.
Oh, Dan Noobs.
Yeah. So if we're looking at this as a story, right?
The Danube.
You've got,
That's the blue Danubes. That's what we're gonna call them. Okay.
So this whole Dan, I'm going to do a little quick sidetrack here before we get back to the story. This whole Dan, putting it into words as to reference Steely Dan, I thought that this was something that we had come up with stuff like the Da Vinci Code or like saying dumb stuff on tour about Steely Dan. But then when I went to see them, Fagan got to talk for a second, and he sort of played a little jazzy number on the piano, and then reached in got really close to the microphone and said, "This tour is called The Dan Who Knew Too Much. This band is called The Dan Who Knew Too Much." And I just was dumbfounded because I was like, this is just something that they've been doing. They're in on the joke.
This is an inside joke.
They understand how ridiculous they are.
Their tours have famously had very strange names,
Yeah.
like the Cantaloupe Gorgonzola tour. They're not. It's not that, but there's the Cantaloupe Gorgonzola is a pretty good name for a tour, though.
And my friend Steve one time called me. I think this was 2 years ago, and he is someone who I think he knows more about Steely Dan than I do. And he went, "Have you seen the tour routing for this tour? It's funny." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "The places they're playing are funny. They're playing in Peoria. They're playing. They're not playing in any major cities. They're playing in these like funny sounding name towns." And he went, "They're doing this on purpose. Don't you understand?"
They're doing it only around like third market Guitar Center locations.
Yeah.
They're like tertiary market. Like this is where that like least successful Guitar Center is. This is where like all the Dan. This is where we're selling the most Dan songbooks.
Yeah, but I think maybe they want to see these places. You know.
I think so too. I think they're probably bored of touring the States, and I don't think that Steely Dan tours Europe that much because of Donald Fagen's Kidney Crystals. Which, if you read his book Eminent Hipsters, which I highly recommend on Penguin Classics, he talks about. He basically complains for 50 pages about how he's got kidney crystals.
I forgot that his autobiography is in Penguin Classics, like along with like Frankenstein and like
Grapes of Wrath,
The Great Gatsby, and
I mean
Eminent Hipsters.
it's up there. You know, it's definitely up there.
It makes so much sense.
It's definitely high. It's high on the Goodreads list.
So anyway, back to the Da Vinci Code. I think that these two songs that you're talking about fit perfectly in the middle of this story, which begins with something like "Ricky, don't lose that number."
Kid Charlemagne. I think it starts with Kid Charlemagne.
You think the story begins with Kid Charlemagne?
I think the story begins with Kid Charlemagne. It's a drug dealer who gets caught by the cops, or he's about to get caught by the cops, and then he leaves town. He leaves San Francisco, where he's located, and moves over to L.A. because the L.A. scene is way more his speed.
Okay.
San Francisco's a little too dangerous for him. Can't really operate his business. He was the king of his scene in San Francisco, but he outgrew it.
Which in a way is interesting because Kid Charlemagne sampled by Kanye West on the album Graduation, which has a similar idea. You know, he no longer can be held down by his beginnings and is now expanding to this level of superstar, which has a lot to do with Los Angeles.
So maybe he sampled Steely Dan on purpose.
God, that moment.
Besides it being fantastic.
Yeah, it's an amazing song.
Yeah.
God,
you want to listen to Kanye's Champion real quick?
Yeah, like just the intro.
Sure.
Man, the first moment I heard that when I got the Graduation leak, like, you know, though I bought it legally later, so he could beat 50 Cent in like the Kanye 50 battle. I was like, man, I knew that Kanye was cool, and he like that record had Can on it. It had
the song "Drunken Hot Girl."
Yeah, that
samples Can from. Is it from Tego Mega or is it from A.G. Bamyasi?
A.G. Bamyasi. Okay. Yeah.
Let's listen to a little bit of Champion, which samples the song
Kid Charlemagne.
Kid Charlemagne.
Yeah.
Champion in their eyes.
Yes, I did.
Did you realize?
Wait, did you get the clean version?
Yes, I did.
Well, you understand.
Yeah.
You understand what Champion is sampling. It's the song Kid Charlemagne, which is the beginning of Chuck's story in the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah. So, however, the sampling doesn't end there, which I think really is a testament to the groovy nature of Steely Dan.
Yes, because we're not the only people who appreciate it.
It's true. Peter Guns and Lord Tariq.
Yes, and of course we've got British girl group All Saints. Did you know that All Saints have sampled Steely Dan?
I believe All Saints was the group most famous for covering Under the Bridge.
By Red Hot Chili Peppers?
Yes.
They did?
I would recommend you listen to it. It's
sometimes I feel
yeah,
like that.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
Well, okay. So All Saints covers a song that still confuses me to no end, a Steely Dan song called The Fez, which is from The Royal Scam. This song is only 2 lyrics. This is probably the least verbose Steely Dan song in the catalog.
Yeah.
There's no story to it other than The Fez. It's we can listen to The Fez and then we'll listen to the All Saints.
Yeah, drop
sample.
the beginning of the Fez and then drop the beginning
Sure.
of the All Saints thing.
Steely Dan was really into doing these kinds of intros around this time period. Kind of like a Philly disco. I believe this is also Bernard Pretty Purdy.
I think so.
You're never gonna do it without the feds on.
Kind of a Larry Gold Sound of Philadelphia orchestral arrangement.
All right, now drop that remix.
Okay.
Let's run that back.
This is All Saints. Song went to number 2.
In what country?
The Brexit.
You get the idea.
So it sampled elements of The Fez from 1976's The Royal Scam.
I was thinking about that when we were earlier discussing the significance of the Fez, along with whatever our theories are for the lyrics. I think it acts as sort of a palate cleanser on that record. It's a heavy record. There's Caves of Altamira. You get a lot of stuff.
Caves of Altamira.
Green Earrings.
Can we talk about Caves of Altamira for a second? How
No
our
problem.
drummer in Lithuania, Ricardo, was in a band called Altamira, named after the Caves of Altamira?
It goes deep. Y'all wear like free jazz noise punk stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe
See-
that's a good transition into punks who love Steely Dan, like ourselves.
Okay.
So you and I bonded over Steely Dan when we first started our group, Lithuania.
I'm pulling my notes out here. This is where it's important.
This is very important.
Keep going.
No, it's okay to pull your notes out. It's cool. We started talking about Steely Dan when we were in jazz school, and we're like, well, yeah, like we were talking about the Boredoms, we were talking about Captain Beefheart, we were talking about
Yes.
Melt Banana, Lightning Bolt, bonding over all these noisy bands. And then we're like, wait, we both like Steely Dan? That's bizarre. And the glue, right, that was bonding us was really the Minutemen.
Sure.
We talk a lot about the Minutemen. They were an SST band in the 80s. Made some of the greatest punk albums ever, including one that we talk about, and one that's already come up is Double Nickels on the Dime.
Yeah.
And sure enough, like halfway through Double Nickels on the Dime, you get a Dr. Wu cover. So I'll play a little bit of Dr. Wu from Steely Dan, and then we'll play the deconstructed punk version of Dr. Wu.
I can't wait. This is probably my favorite cover ever in the history of music.
So original Dr. Wu on the album Katie Lied.
Yes.
At AOL.
Also, the only band I ever want to do air piano to. The chords are so good.
Is that Chimes?
Yeah, it's wind chimes.
I think this is probably keys with reverb on them.
Katie tried. I was halfway crucified. I was on the other side.
You can sing along to it.
I couldn't do it justice, man. You walked in.
Fagan, if you're listening, great vocal take.
Seriously.
I mean, what did Becker really do on this song?
Oh, come on. Don't ever bring that up, man.
I'm going to get hate mail from Walter Becker.
Seriously. He's more powerful than you realize.
He's going to stab me with his steely knife.
Okay, so
Okay.
So let's move
are
on.
you with me, Dr. Wu?
'Cause-
By the way, there is a dentist in Philadelphia
Named Dr.
Wu.
Wu. Yeah.
And every time I walk by, my heart just bursts with joy. Minuteman. Oh, yeah.
Don't seem right.
the taste you said you'd bring to me. So this is where I think the lyrics of this song fit into the Da Vinci Code.
Oh yeah, you want to get into that?
Yeah, well, no, I'd like to keep this going if it's okay.
Okay.
So we've got Ricky, Don't Lose That Number, right? And then this, to me, is like the in-between period in his life where he's starting to kind of do his downward, spiral, if you will.
Oh, sure.
Into
Bring
sort
Nine
of,
Inch Nails into it.
like, old age and being washed up. He's seeing like the negative side of like the dark underbelly of this city of Los Angeles that he loves so dearly. He's waiting on someone, is going to give him a taste, but this person isn't coming. And I think it segues perfectly into Deacon Blues. So the one thing I wanted to talk about something else. Last year, Steely Dan played the wonderful Coachella Festival.
Oh yes.
And I remember there was this sort of moment where we had this like cultural reappropriation of Steely Dan.
Yes.
Where I think Pitchfork posted an article like, is it cool to like Steely Dan now? Like the top 10 Steely Dan songs you may have missed. Vice wrote an article about how Steely Dan was great. And
yeah, we're not riding any coattails here, but
No.
I'm excited that there's a Dan resurgence.
you know why we're not riding any coattails is because it stopped. Like it was probably like a 2-month period and then it was out. And you know who replaced him? The Grateful Dead. But let me tell you something. If we could somehow get some kind of charity benefit compilation where everyone covers Steely Dan, I think we could really bring this back. Like
we get Michael McDonald.
Yeah, I'm thinking we go for the younger crowd. Like I think we could do
Mac DeMarco.
Yeah, we could do Mac DeMarco
Tame
and
Impala.
the dude from Dive.
War on Drugs still heavy Steely Dan. You
know.
want to talk about the War on Drugs Steely Dan connection? I mean, I feel like War on Drugs are maybe one of the bands that is like a perfectionist.
Yes.
Like they spent a lot of time in the studio perfecting their sounds, and that record sounds really good. That's why that record stuck out.
Yeah.
It took like 3 years to make it.
We could get like Wilco and Becker doing Dirty Work together live. I think it would be fantastic.
We should definitely get Mac DeMarco on Reelin' in the Ears, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there's something I wanted to read, if I'm allowed to.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So during this time, this tour that was led around Coachella, Donald Fagen posted a live tour diary. And I believe that even in his age, he has not declined in sarcasm.
He's mellowed out at all.
And to me, this is a really great example of why they're so different than most other musicians. This is him at Coachella. Like the previous Friday, most of the music I heard was in the circa 1965 Dylan-esque mode, minus Genius or anything like that. I've been hearing this stuff for more than half a century, and it's getting pretty dreary. Geez, that's how I started out more or less. I'm sure these guys don't even know they're doing early Bob. At least hip-hop, which is tough for me to listen to, has got a few genuine eccentrics. Maybe something awesome will turn up. Maybe not. As the empire declines, so does cultural literacy and almost everything else. Ironically, high technology, once thought to be the savior of civilization, has become our Alaric I, our barbarian invasion. Increasingly, it looks like life in the future will be nasty, brutish, and long.
Wow, and he's even using the decline of the empire again. He's always talking about the empire, Babylon, Babylon's sister. He's talking about the Babylonian empire.
We're making connections left and right, baby.
Yeah. I wonder. These themes that he's talking about, he's been talking about them for the entirety of the career of Steely Dan. So now he's just applying it to his own tour diary. He's also probably has irritated kidneys, and he's at a festival, and he's very upset because the porta potty is closed down, and he's got nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So he's forced to watch, AC/DC.
Oh, yeah. Didn't he say he didn't know who AC/DC was?
Donald Fagen does not know who AC/DC is, which is incredible. I just love when that kind of stuff happens. We're like, I just never heard of AC/DC. Big whoop. They sound like Bob Dylan to me.
Wow.
Bob Dylan AC/DC connection. Didn't think that was going to happen today.
We did it.
Yeah, we
make
did.
all tons of connections.
Yeah. Here. So now that places us in 2016.
Yes.
Where do you think the Steely Dan resurgence is going to go? Is it up to us, Lithuania, to carry on the torch? Am I going to get like Dark Aviators and just going to sit in the studio all day obsessing over a ride cymbal sound.
It's tough because it's like, I don't really think anyone is really worthy to take up the mantle of the Dan or to carry the torch because it's so difficult. Like, it's not like a subtle thing where it's just like I think with that Grateful Dead compilation that just came out, it's like there's a lot of different ways you can reinterpret that music. But with Steely Dan, it's so specific and it's so tough to do it the right way. Like, I can tell you that we tried in my Steely Dan ensemble in school, but like it was okay at best. You know, like learning those guitar solos was really hard. I was 19. I messed up a lot.
Hey, 19.
Yeah. But you know, it was weird. We tried, but it was tough, you know? So it would be great to see people try, but I don't know, man.
Are the War on Drugs capable? I think they might be. You know, they're going to spend a lot of time on their next record. I think we're going to spend some time on our next record.
This is my favorite: is when a music podcast starts sounding like a sports podcast, where you're like, next season, I think you
Is
know,
he going to break his ankle again?
Yeah, I think Dave and Adam could really do it. You know, they could do a track by track Asia, reinterpretation.
I just, my goal in life is to eventually have someone make a classic albums about something that I've worked on, and then they turn it up and they're like, oh, that's just terrible. Oh, listen to that raggedy snare sound.
Yeah.
That bass tone is like Korn or something, you know? That's what I'm hoping. Not to say anything negative about Korn's bass tone. I love Korn.
Yeah, you got to chill on that, man.
I know, I'm a big Korn fan. I'm not a Korn hater at all. I'm a Korn apologist. Talking about new metal.
Maybe
band
the
Korn.
problem is that we like too much music and we don't have any taste.
Yeah. Do you want to cap this with like the main drag story?
Oh my gosh.
I feel like we need to talk about the main drag story.
My friend Steve, who I discussed earlier,
who talked about Peoria.
He talked about how funny it was they were playing in Peoria. He really is responsible for me getting into some Dan choice cuts. He used to be in the band Dragon King, and one time we were on tour in New York, and he went to Main Drag Music. I didn't follow him, but he's looking at guitars, kind of walking around, and then out of the corner of his eye, he sees a long-haired, bespectacled man with his friend trying out different amps. As he gets closer to this man, he hears the man awkwardly mumble, "This is the tone I got on Peg." He realizes it's Walter Becker. He texts me and says, "Dude, I think Walter Becker's here." And I said, "You have to go talk to him." And
did he talk to him?
He did. And he said that he was so kind of bummed out that someone was talking to him that he didn't want to ask for a picture or anything like that.
Sure.
But he got to shake his hand, and I wish that I was there with him. But I hope one day, Becker, if you're listening, I would love to meet you.
And I would love to ask you about the tone on Peg. How did you get that tone? What amp are you playing?
Or his solo record, which we can talk about next time.
Yeah. Hopefully there's a next time.
Maybe next time is just like us in the car later. But yeah. Steely Dan rules.
Yes.
Thanks so much, you guys. That was
thank you.
That was amazing for both the newbies and the
Donatics.
Donatics, yeah.
The Donatics. Well, listen, Eric Slick, Dominic, Angelella, thanks so much for being with us, guys, here at the Talkhouse Music Podcast, live from Samsung 837.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.